Trust. It's the fabric of your character, which will grant you the allyship of camaraderie and understanding for others to follow your leadership model and trust in your structure of hope and guidance. It means that you've invested in the process of building rapport and compassion with those you are trusted to serve. However, in America today, there is still more work to do. According to my friends over at The Hill, they've discovered the following: that only 21% of U.S. employees trust their leadership at work, which is down from 24%, which was recorded by Gallup in 2019. Perhaps the parallel can be made because employees feel as though their shortcomings are magnified as everyone in America heads back to work. And now it's incumbent upon leaders to discover ways to determine how to repair, ways to bottle the feeling of distrust and trigger a sense of equal prosperity amongst the working public and those that they are in charge of leading. It's also important to remember that your potential is only as good as the reality you turn it into. Which begs the question, how do we create a mutually beneficial partnership where everyone has a chance to thrive through their thoughts, objectives, and opinions on how to grow both in organizational culture and their own personal development? My friend Cory Scheer is an organizational trust strategist who helps organizations, teams, and leaders become more trustworthy, productive, and focused. He does this by using empirical evidence to define reality, implementing a proven trust-building framework, and walking alongside clients to develop clear, obtainable, and long-lasting data-informed strategies for success. And Scheer joined me this week to tell me more about building trust, cultivating great leaders, and building an organizational culture where everyone stands a chance to win, thrive, and prosper within the walls and structure of an organization. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Ready? I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program on this Monday, and I'm excited to talk to you about trusted leadership this morning. Great to see you, and thanks for a few minutes, my friend.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you today.
Absolutely. Now, Cory, I know as an organizational trust strategist, my friend, you work with leaders and organizational teams to help them become more focused, trustworthy, and productive. So I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you telling me what makes you so fabulous and why you love what you do.
Well, thank you for that intro. I do love what I do because I I get to help organizations, leaders and teams and their entire organization understand more clearly what the condition of their current workplace culture is. And then we assess that. Then we help them with a model, a framework of trust that has been proven for over 20 years now that we utilize. We call it the structure of trust. Then we equip them with that model. And then once we utilize their current data, the assessment, and then teach them this framework, we walk alongside them and establish with them what we call a blueprint for strengthening trust. And when we do that, what we see is they have much better success in retaining employees, in improving their workplace culture, having loyalty of their employees, which of course translates to more creativity, more innovation, overall a better esprit de corps. And then that is typically translated, of course, to the customer experience as well. So it's something that we come alongside and help them with, something that is foundational, something that they need to be focused on. But oftentimes based on our data, we see that a lot of organizations, they are taking for granted what they think is to be true in their organization, that they are trustworthy, when in fact the trust level within their organization is much lower than they expect.
Yeah, and Cory, you talk about the structure of trust. How do you think we can translate that to sort of the societal level of trust and healing the divisions that sort of bring us apart? How do you think we can use the structure of trust to really repair the societal divisions that exist today?
Yeah, such a great question. And that's the beauty about the model, is that because trust is something that is relational inherently. So we're strengthening trust because you and I are connected. We had a great introduction. I was referred to you by somebody. We started our meeting today on time. Like, all of the things that help kind of strengthen and build this relational trust are in motion right now. And in the same way, we could choose to destroy that or to damage that trust by three things. There are always three things that are a part of every trusted element within a relationship or a team. And this is what makes up the structure of trust. The first building block is competency. So we have to have leadership competency, communication competency, project management competency, financial competency, all the technical competency that we need in order to do the work that we do on behalf of our organization with others. The second building block is problem solving. That is not only the process of solving problems collectively, but even more important than that is to ensure that we've got a process to identify the right problems to solve. So we have to understand what are the problems, and then how do we collectively work together to solve them. And then the third building block that is required. So all three of these are required. And this is the one where I think we probably struggle the most in organizations. That's what our data says to be true. But also at society at large, the third building block is caring for others, which means putting other people's needs before our own. It means having empathy and sympathy and listening more than speaking. That is probably the building block that I think we generally struggle with the most. And it's typically because we're either in a hurry, we have our own agenda, we feel like there's a power dynamic, and because of that power dynamic, we can kind of hang that over other people and utilize that in order for us to step ahead of them if we're not careful. But if we do not have all three of those elements of trust, competency, problem solving, and care for others, the research shows that our trust goes down, our value in that person or in that product goes down, and then so too does our loyalty. So if we can be committed to either individually as a team, an organization, or more culturally at large, be committed to those building blocks, we would see remarkable things occur.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about TrustCentric in just a second, but I want to also ask you about the importance of building relationship capital, because as you just said, building relationships is the heartbeat and sort of the nucleus of trust. So tell me about how we can sustain a way to build healthy relationships and habits for that matter as well.
That's a great question. Where I would always encourage somebody is, I think about it in terms of what I call the trust ratio or the listening ratio of a 9-to-1. So if I ask you with intent to listen, if I ask you 9 questions for every one bit of feedback or one bit of counsel that I would give to you, but if I had a posture of listening to you at a rate of 90% versus me telling you what to do, that is such an easy way for me to establish a level of trust with you, because this will allow me to, number one, listen and slow down my own thoughts, but also learn from you so that I can shape my next question or my next several questions, as well as even what I might offer to you in a statement that is going to be shaped by your experience. And that's vital. And one of the things that I appreciate about the work that you do, Kevin, is that you do this all of the time. You have hundreds and hundreds of podcast episodes where you specialize in asking other people questions. As a result of that, that's an inherently trust building activity and vocation and pursuit. So I really appreciate how you model that for all of us who watch your podcast. But in that same way, if we could do that in our workplace or in our relationships, where we're listening first, we're taking action on it on behalf of the other person, that will immediately start establishing a new level of trust with that individual.
Yeah, and you work through your company, TrustCentric, as I said, to build leadership and trust structures so that organizations and teams can thrive. So tell me all about TrustCentric and its mission, my friend.
We utilize this model, the structure of trust, and we have 4 areas in which we primarily work with organizations. I do a lot of keynote speaking, talking about this with various industries. I do workshop facilitation, whether it's 2 hours or 4 hours or a multi-day workshop. We do consultative services where we're working with organizations to not only help establish a new level of trust, but also help them thinking about the vision of their organization or their strategy, or developing new efficiencies, or even a policy or practice review. Or at times we'll work with organizations to look at their employee pathway program. All of these things are resting on this foundational element of trust. So everything that we do, we always start with this core understanding of what it means to be a trustworthy organization. And then the final area that we help organizations with is through executive coaching. And I do a lot of coaching with senior level executives, CEOs, chief people officers, vice presidents, general managers. And we're rolling up our sleeves. We're doing a lot of work that's tactical. We're trying to infuse this model of trust into every interaction that they have, so that they can begin to really start thinking about trust as something that is a priority and a must-have versus just a nice-to-have.
And Cory, I'm curious to ask you about the level of work that leaders have to do to really gain the trust of the people they're in charge of leading, because it's important to lead with a sense of empathy and compassion and really meet people where they are, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And if that is our posture, that will allow us to slow our own perhaps perceived understanding of the issue and really have a comprehensive view of the challenges and the problems that we need to solve. Obviously, as leaders move into an organization and they move up in their level of authority, the opportunity for those gaps in trust to occur, those also increase. And our research shows that the perception of trust between leaders of an organization and the frontline employees or the individual contributors on average is around 31%. And so if we can work collectively to close that trust gap, which is why I wrote the book that I did and titled it that Closing the Trust Gap. But as we do that, as we close that trust gap, we will see really significant effects on the organization that will have a dramatic effect on KPIs like employee retention, employee productivity, overall workplace culture, employee advocacy. And those are the things that matter, not only from a cost standpoint, but also just in generally, we want to create those environments though that our employees can flourish.
Yeah, and one of the ways we can close the trust gap there, Cory, is, hiring individuals with disabilities and really embracing the concept of inclusion at work. And as you know, I have cerebral palsy, and I work with organizations to help them really increase their level of understanding, what it means to truly be an inclusive organization and really infuse individuals with disabilities into the workforce. So tell me about the competitive advantage you think lies within hiring individuals with disabilities and really infusing them within your organizational culture.
It's critical. It's vital for us to ensure that we are creating as much of an inclusive environment as we possibly can. The requirement of the leader, the requirement of the hiring manager in order to do that, though, is to think through a lens of trust first, which means how do I improve my competency in the area of inclusivity and diversity? How do I solve the problems that are currently in place that is preventing from us having a more inclusive environment? And then third, how do we demonstrate true care for others, not only for our current team members, but also for the future of the organization, for our community, for the employees that we will eventually be hiring, but even implementing, to your question, that structure of trust, of competency, problem solving, and care for others. And the reality is, whether you have an organization that is really broken with trust, or you've got an organization that is thriving with trust, we all have an opportunity to continue to strengthen it in any area of the organization that we work within. We should never feel like we have arrived when it comes to being as trustworthy as possible.
Yeah, and within your book, Cory, other than the strategies from creating that structure of trust, I'm curious, if I asked you to compile a wish list of 3 things you hope leaders and everyday people got out of the book that you wrote, my friend, what do you think? What do you think you would compile that list with?
That's a great question. The first thing is that I want leaders and teams and organizations to know that trust is something that can be measured. It can actually be a standalone KPI. We've got assessment, we've got lots of research that shows it, and we've got the research that shows that when an organization embraces that reality, they become better, they become healthier. Second is that there is a framework that is not only memorable, but it's durable. It's something that can be written out on the back of a napkin. The structure of trust is very simple. It's not something that is hyper complex or requires advanced levels of research education in order to understand it. This is something that is very practical and it's proven to work. And then third is that the number one thing that I would encourage any leader or team with in regards to trust is, if they choose to not take action on the reality of the trust within their organization, they can continue to expect the same results. The charge of the book is, and it's actually the subtitle of the book, is that it's about taking action on what matters most for leaders, teams, and organizations. And so if we try to close the trust gap without taking action, it will not occur, and we will never fully realize the effect of what it means to be a trustworthy organization.
Yeah, and one of the things, Cory, any organization has to do, in my view, in order to really stay on the cutting edge of gaining and maintaining or preserving the trust, is really doing an autopsy of their organizational culture. It's what they create habits, but it's also imperative that we do sort of an autopsy or a checklist on our organizational culture, isn't it?
It is. And, one of the things I find, Kevin, is that a lot of organizations, they depend on like a satisfaction survey from their employees, but there's frustration because, number one, they don't get maximum engagement from their employees. But then number two, the management is not set up in a way to actually do something with that feedback in a meaningful way. So although employee satisfaction surveys are important, I do think that you can supplement that with a different type of what you said, like an autopsy, where you are really understanding the core health and the overall understanding of the building blocks of trust. That requires a different set of questions. It requires a different discipline, and it requires a commitment to actually do something with the data versus just sending out an anonymous survey and thinking that the feedback alone is what's going to make any changes. It requires daily, weekly monthly intentional focus on strengthening trust in order for you to achieve those results. It really comes down to organizational discipline.
Yeah, and you talk about that discipline, Corey, and one way you can keep your employers your employees engaged in the process is really valuing their opinion, isn't it? And having them feel as if they can progress in the company, because then you all row in the same boat, don't you?
You do those regular, rhythmic, that cadence of feedback, whether it's a listening circle where you've got a small group of individuals have an opportunity to share openly, whether it's more focus group where there's a specific question that they're really working through, or even, a weekly or a bi-weekly one-on-one 30-minute conversation with a supervisor that allows you to really understand how are they doing, what are they focused on, how are they feeling about the work that they're doing. But that level of rhythm and cadence and kind of a disciplined approach, really like a scheduled approach, that's so vital, even if there's nothing that is revolutionary in those conversations, but that regular touch point of open communication, it does build trust. That's what the data shows to be true.
Yeah, and Corey, I'm fascinated to ask you, whether you think there's a difference between a motivational and tactical leader, and how do you think the best leaders sort of infuse or combine those two traits?
So that's a great question. I think it's actually very difficult for a leader to have a direct effect on motivating somebody else. I think that a leader can create the conditions for somebody to become self-motivated. But as somebody who has 4 kids, I've got data to show that one tactic with one child does not motivate any of the other 3. And so, but I can create the conditions. I can create an expectation. I can have tactical conversations. I can be trustworthy. I can be competent, problem solving. I can demonstrate care for others. I can encourage them. I can challenge them. I can create those conditions to where their self-motivation is activated so that they can actually take responsibility for the work that they need to do. And so as a leader, I view it as, how am I creating a condition or the conditions or an environment for this person that I have the privilege of leading to become self-motivated to do the work and for them to take ownership. And if you do not have trust in that relationship, it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to truly allow for those conditions to occur for somebody to be self-motivated.
Yeah, and Corey, if I asked you to define the word excellence, both inside and outside of the office, how do you think you would define both workplace and life excellence?
I would define that as exceeding expectations in the most trustworthy way possible. That's how I would define excellence.
And yeah, just building on that, when we lead with emotional leadership and really telling people the human side of leadership, what do you think it means to lead with effective emotional leadership?
So our research shows that one of the most important things that we can do tactically to strengthen trust with others is to demonstrate care for the whole person. So that means physical, emotional, psychological, relational, of course, vocational, in some instances, spiritual needs of that other person. And that we not only are permitted to do that within a workplace environment, but we really need to do that. Of course, we want to be appropriate with people and how we demonstrate that care. But the care that we provide for others in a workplace is so much more than just vocational needs that are being met. It includes all of those things: physical, social, psychological, emotional. All of those things are very, very important in order to strengthen trust with the teams that we work with.
Yeah, and Corey, if I asked you to personally define the word allyship and really interconnecting that with relationships, how do you think you would define allyship?
I would define that in utilizing the the principles of empathy and sympathy, which is, and ultimately it's, and benevolence, where you're ultimately putting other people's needs before your own. And one of my favorite words in leadership is the word alongside. You are walking alongside them in order for them to be successful. You're holding the standards that you know to be true, that's important. You're equipping them with those things, but ultimately allyship in my mind means walking alongside them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we talked a little bit about this earlier about the idea of empowering your employees, but uh, from an overall perspective, how do you think empowering your employees can create a competitive advantage within your organization?
Well, my brother, who he gives me lots of counsel, he says, you know, the bottleneck of every bottle is always near the top. And so in the same way, the bottleneck of productivity and impact in an organization, it's always going to be narrowed down as, you know, you get higher up within an organization. So what that means to me is when I'm equipping other people to do something, when I'm empowering them to do something, I'm actually duplicating my efforts, not a carbon copy, but I'm duplicating my efforts. I'm scaling the opportunity of the organization to grow and to impact more and more people. If I restrain that only to the actions of myself, I'm inherently going to be someone who will be limited in the ability to actually expand the work that we're doing. And so that's why equipping and empowering is so vital, because without doing that, you are not actually going to move towards a more unlimited approach. You'll be much more limited in the overall scope that you can have with your organization.
Yeah, and to that point, Cory, I'm also wondering your perspective on the whole idea of thoughtful leadership and how that's interconnected with the concept of diversity of thought and opinion as well. How do you think those are interconnected?
I think they're completely interconnected. And I think the way that we can become better, better individually is by a posture of listening, a posture of actively engaging in conversation, willing to have a conversation that may be unknown to me or even uncomfortable for me, and a conversation that it is not necessarily always about my issue to resolve or my issue to have an opinion on, but in that process of discovery, we have the opportunity to really show other people respect. And then in that process, we build trust and learn from them, that's an incredibly important pursuit in the work that we do with others.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cory, as you mentioned, you're also a keynote speaker, my friend, and I'm wondering your thoughts on the importance of really the idea of engagement when you're speaking to an audience, and what are your principles of success when you are going to speak or connect with an audience? So how do you think we can create more effective and more authentic speakers as well?
I love that question. Thank you for that. I'm deeply passionate about speaking and speaking in a way that is very helpful for those that I speak with. And so a couple of principles that I am committed to. Number one, you have to talk about something that you're passionate about. And if you're not passionate about it, it will not be received in a way that is going to be maximized from retention and an emotion standpoint for the audience. Number two, you've got to do your homework, and you really have to understand as much as you can about the current culture of that organization or about the dynamics of the gathering of people that you're speaking with. Number three, I try to schedule my keynotes to where I'm spending more than just the time that I'm there speaking. I want to spend time at that conference or at that event, and maybe an hour before or a few hours afterwards, to where I'm really understanding and I'm helpful as people come up and ask me questions. But then when it comes to the actual speaking, you have to engage in the emotions of individuals within the first 30 to 60 seconds. You have to, either through a storytelling or through some kind of an engagement opportunity, something in order to really get them engaged and plugged in, for them to set down their phone and to lock in with you. And when you can set that tone in that first 30 to 60 seconds, that's where, with a sophisticated approach to the rest of your content, that's where I think you're going to have the most effective speaking engagement.
Yeah, Cory, one of the things you know about me from reading my background and story is that at the age of 9, Cory, I was told by a doctor that I would not be able to walk for the duration of my life because of the severity of the cerebral palsy I was born with. But one of the things that I always say is the tragedy of life isn't when it ends, it's refusing to live while you still have air to breathe. And one of the things that I do from a personal perspective is I really try to ground myself and trying to find something that I can reconnect with myself with in order to serve other people. So I'm curious, when you look at your own personal life, what do you use as principles to ground yourself and really reconnect with yourself when everything else in your life seems to be caving? How do you reconnect with yourself?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. For me, it starts every morning. I have quiet, dark study where I've got coffee and an hour of thinking and reflection, sometimes personal meditation. For me, that could look like prayer or thinking and reflecting about my family. And that is a very important hour of my day. And so that's typically from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then at that point, I'm able to engage in the work that I need to do for the rest of the day. The other thing, just more generally speaking, is I have learned this through my own trauma that I've experienced in my life, whether it's through physical trauma that I experienced 10 years ago with a very serious bike accident, or personal trauma with the loss of my parents and somebody who has experienced deep grief in that. I try to start every engagement that I have with a sense of gratitude, recognizing, like you said, we have air to breathe. The sun is shining, even when it's cloudy outside. There's still the sun that came up today. The blessing of relationships, the blessing of our experiences, the blessing of our health. All of those things should be our initial compass or the lens in which we're viewing our life through. And as we do that, that allows us to ground us in what matters most. And it also allows us to ground us in the relationships that we have with others.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Cory, I'm going to end our conversation this morning by asking you a two-part question, my friend. And I'm fascinated to ask you about the idea of leading from a place of prosperity and growth. And how do you think that's interconnected with your personal and professional legacy, my friends? And you can attack that two-part question however you wish.
Well, I think it's important to have a clear and a personal definition of what prosperity means. I think the default is that prosperity would mean an abundance of financial resources. I actually think about prosperity slightly different. I think about prosperity in the terms of maximizing the options that we have within our life, whether it's financial or time or vocational or relational. When we have maximum amount of choices, it allows us to choose to do lots of different things. And if the grounding of our life is in service to others, then that maximizes our choices to serve and support other people. And so for me, it's not about accumulating the financial prosperity and limiting it only to finances. It's much more about, how do I create conditions to where I maximize options so that I might be able to serve other people through vocational or personal pursuits. And I believe that as I look back on my life, and whenever I stop working or whenever I slow down with things, if I can look back and realize that I've maximized those options, I feel like that's a life well led.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Cory, tell me, if people want to get connected with the good work that you do or yourself personally, what's the best way they can do that?
So people can connect with me on LinkedIn. They can just look up my name, Cory, and then Scheer. Or if they're interested in the work that I'm doing from a coaching and a consulting and a training standpoint, that's www.TrustCentric, trustconsulting.com. And then lastly, my book is now officially on Amazon. It's called Closing the Trust Gap. You can go directly to Amazon and look it up, or go to www.trustgapbook.com.
Fabulous. Well, Cory, as you know, I relish the chance to have meaningful conversations that move the needle of progress forward, and it was delightful to engage in conversation with you all about trust and leadership, my friend. Your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been such a privilege and a joy to be with you today. Thank you.